Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Before we get started, I just want to remind you to hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to our channel, and if you'd like to get weekly reminders when we drop a new video, click on the bell icon.
Each week, we're going to be talking about the upcoming gospel lectionary reading for the coming weekend. And we're going to be doing that in the context of love, inclusion, and societal justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking in the sense of justice, but that will also something that will be said during this time where Todd and I are just discussing back and forth. Something will inspire you to do more than just talking this week.
So it's good to be together, Herb. We missed last week, and that was my fault. I was really under the weather with a cold and really
I'm
hated that we
glad you're
missed our
feeling
chance.
better.
Yeah, thank you. I hate that we missed our conversation about the triumphal entry. That was going to be a great conversation. But you know what? The great thing about the lectionary is it'll come around again next year.
12 months
So
from now,
we'll
we'll do it.
we will do it. So glad to be with you though this week as we go into Easter weekend. We're in the midst of Holy Week, and even though we could do a bunch of bonus episodes about each night of the week, we're just going to zero in on the lectionary reading for Easter Sunday and really look into John chapter 20. Probably get some informed thinking from Acts as well, and hopefully just some really good conversation as we get ready for our highest holy day. So why don't you kick us off with where you started this week, Herb?
Yeah, well, when it comes to Easter, and I know that within the Christian tradition, we have from the very beginning, we have tried to make sense out of Jesus's death. And when someone just blanketly reads the New Testament, what you'll find is that in the early church, there was a multitude of grappling and lots of explanations and theories, and some of them they don't always agree with each other, but they're theories trying to explain Jesus's death, why Jesus died. That's why we have so many different atonement theories in Christianity
Okay,
today, and we
right.
have throughout Christian history. There's always been different ways of explaining the purpose of Jesus's death, why Jesus had to die, all of that. I want to give a shout out this week, and again, wherever you're at on the journey, I think there's room for all of us in the Christian tradition. But where I land personally, what is the most life-giving for me is focusing on the resurrection rather than on the dying. And I know that resurrection is a response to the dying, but I side with those who subscribe to naming the idea of redemptive suffering as the myth of redemptive suffering. I side with womanist scholars and feminist scholars, Christian scholars who don't see the dying of Jesus as salvific as the resurrecting of Jesus, and specifically the teachings of Jesus. There's much more salvific meaning for me in what Jesus taught and the life that he lived than the dying. But if anybody would like some more resources on that, I'll throw out one this week, and that's Dolores Williams in Sisters in the Wilderness, Womanist God Talk. I mentioned her this week in my blog at renewedheartministries.com. And you can read there just the focus of Jesus, what Jesus taught, and the book of Acts, again, there's lots of different explanations in the New Testament. I come down with the book of Acts. The book of Acts is where I feel the most at home. In the book of Acts, the good news is not that Jesus died. The good news is never that Jesus died for you. The good news of the gospel is he whom the Romans killed, God has brought back to life
Mm,
and fulfilled for us the promises through raising this Jesus. I resonate with that. I like that.
yeah. Well, and I think the reason why people, and we have to think this through, just, because again, unpacking uh, millennia of Christian teaching about the redemptive suffering of Jesus, you just have to go back and kind of think it through again. And you have to think about why people who were the followers of Jesus were so crushed when he died, why they became absolutely hopeless when he died. The reason is because it was his teaching, it was his miracles, it was his the life that he gave to people during his 3.5 years of public ministry. Jesus, it becomes a revolutionary for these people, the center of their hopes of what a better world could look like. And so his death does not come as some kind of divine plan. It comes as evil triumphing over good. So you have to understand that this death for the people who were living at the time of Christ, this was not a good thing. And the only thing that made it better was the resurrection. The death was the problem. This would be the, and to go along with this would be the same thing as if we had a figure like an iconic figure like Martin Luther King today. If his death, you look at how people were so just devastated by his death. His resurrection would not have, if he had been resurrected, what people would have wanted was for him to carry on the work that he had been doing before his murder.
Right.
They would not want to then say, you know what, now all that stuff that you were doing before, Martin, for civil rights, that doesn't matter now, because now we're going to turn you into an exalted figure who we're going to worship, and it's all about our relationship to you after
Yeah, none of that makes
as an
sense.
exalted figure. That doesn't make sense. Martin Luther King was who he was because of what he did for people of color, and the story of Jesus is what Jesus did for the marginalized uh, and the outcast.
Yeah, I love that, because if Martin Luther King had come back to life, nobody in the black community would go around saying Martin Luther King died for you. That's the good news. They would have said the
Right.
good news is that King's alive.
Right.
And that's what
That's
we
right.
see happening in the book of Acts with Jesus.
Yeah. And then of course there is, when you talk about the myth of redemptive suffering, I mean, you're talking about how that whole doctrine of redemptive suffering has been used to keep people in their place.
That's right.
It's been used to maintain a power structure. It's not saying Jesus being willing to die for the cause is an admirable quality. Being willing to go for the sake of the cause, to for a person of privilege, as Christians believe Jesus was, to some Christians, obviously majority of Christians believe he is divine, to come down and be willing to put his life on the line for the cause is admirable. But he didn't come to die. That's two different things. Martin Luther King was willing to put his life on the line. He did not intend to die. He intended to live a full life of serving others, but he realized that by definition, for the work that he was trying to do, it would be risky. And Jesus was recognized that what he was doing was risky. There's throughout the Gospels people wanting to take his life. And so while the myth of redemptive suffering isn't admiring Jesus to being willing to lay it all on the line for the cause, it's saying that there was nothing good that came from the death. The good came from the work he did in his life, and the good came on the other side of the resurrection. Death was the evil that got in the way of the good.
Yeah, I like how another book, and I didn't plan on recommending all of these, but they're just all coming to mind now. Is the book Christianity, Patriarchy, and Abuse. It is now out of print. But one of the things I love also, the first article in that book is by Brown and Parker. You can Google God So Loved the World question mark. It'll be the first one that pops up. Google God So Loved the World, Brown and Parker, and it'll come right up for anyone who's watching this. But one of the things I love that they say about that is Jesus didn't come to die. Jesus didn't choose death. Jesus chose to refuse to let go of life when
Right.
threatened with death. And
That's
that's a
great
subtle
phrasing.
difference.
Great phrasing.
That's a subtle difference. He refused to let go of that which was life-giving when they threatened him with death. And that means Jesus didn't die. Jesus was murdered.
Right.
Jesus was the victim of state violence. And the cross, far be it from being part of some cosmic child abuse plan where
Mm,
God punishes Jesus instead of us, the cross was the Roman attempt to silence and to do away with Jesus's ministry. And the resurrection undoes, reverses, and overcomes
mhm,
everything accomplished in his death and causes the saving work of Jesus, his saving life, to live on, to continue on. It
mhm, mhm,
changes the cross from being kind of the halting of Jesus's salvific work, transforming the cross into the Roman interruption of Jesus's
mhm,
work and causes
mhm.
it to go on.
Yeah, that's very well said. The phrasing is perfect on that. Um,
And
and
again, the book of Acts, if you want a list of verses, go check out this week's blog at renewedheartministries.com. It comes out this Friday, this Good Friday. All the verses from the book of Acts will be in there. Womanist scholar Dolores Williams, her comments will be in there. And then there's much more as well you can find.
right. And so then for us to be to ever think of using Jesus' death and suffering as to say to and to use that language towards uh, people in marginalized positions and
Horrific.
to say your suffering is accomplishing a redemptive person or a purpose, just like Jesus did. That is you are abusing people by using that language.
Yeah, and
your
I
your
just want to
your
zero
position
in.
is to, as a privileged person, is to help people move out of that suffering, to move out of what they're facing, and into the realm of liberation and freedom.
Yeah, and you're not making that up, Todd. How many pastors have encouraged spouses in or partners in abusive relationships to stay with? And I think specifically, I was raised by a single mom for most of my life, my childhood, and I watched pastors encourage my mother to stay in
Mm,
abusive relationships with horrible husbands, using the example of Jesus, that
yeah.
if you just bear your cross, and that's not what bearing the cross means,
No.
but the language was if you just bear the cross, be like Jesus. And that kind of gospel, it may sound good on the surface. The myth of redemptive suffering may sound good initially, but when you try to apply it in the life of the oppressed or in survivors or in abuse victims, it's not only dangerous, it can be lethal. And that's
Mhm.
why I reject it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
You're
right.
not making that up. How many pastors have told women to stay in abusive relationships and used Jesus and the cross, placing the saying that they could be the conduit of their husband's salvation if they could just stick it out, bear it, stick it, stay with it. Well, it's horrible.
No. So, with all that in that background, then let's continue on with what we were
Yeah.
where we were
Yeah,
heading.
and again, I just all of that was just to encourage those who also struggle with the myth of redemptive suffering, who this weekend will be focusing more on the resurrection and the salvific, that love can conquer hate, that
Hmm.
injustice, that justice can conquer injustice, that all of that stuff, that inclusion can conquer marginalization and exclusion. Anyone who's focusing in that direction, I just want to cheer you on this weekend. that is a life-giving direction, and I think we need more of it,
Mm,
especially in the Christian tradition. But yeah, the Gospel of John, and a great segue. We were just talking about women. The timing of the Gospel of John is interesting to me. That this is when the church was beginning to leave the egalitarian equality of the house churches, that model, and moving toward, well, the patriarchalists were kind of getting control, and the patriarchy was it was being influenced by surrounding cultures, Roman cultures that were patriarchalist, and you had the patriarchists saying, women should be silent in church. This is the same
mm,
time the passage in Timothy was written where they said women, Eve wasn't, or Adam wasn't deceived. Eve was deceived. Women need to
mm,
remain quiet and just do what they're told and learn at home and all that stuff. It was at this time that the Johannine community, which was more egalitarian, fired back against this, blaming Eve, women need to be quiet, with this story of Mary this week. And I
mm,
think it's a really cool response. Again, it
mm,
shows the tension between egalitarianism and patriarchy has always been within Christianity, but the Gospel of John lands on the side of egalitarianism. And uh, yeah, the story of Mary, in the context of what was happening in the church at that time, I think
mm.
is powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it is. And it's so rare within the scriptures to see this much, this much ink being
Mm,
used uh, to tell her story and her encounter with the risen Christ. I mean, it is just, just when you're, when you take in the corpus of the scriptures, and then all of a sudden you have this long description of what of Mary and her emotion and her passion for the Lord and her reaction to him finding her, and it's just remarkable, and it speaks volumes to where John and the Johannine community was at that time.
yeah, and in these closing chapters, each one of these communities is named. If we understand what was happening during that time, each one of these communities is named. There was the Christian community that recognized the authority of Peter, the Christian community that recognized the authority of John, the Christian community that recognized the authority of Thomas, the apostleship of
Mm-hmm.
Thomas. You have all these communities, all these names are mentioned in these closing chapters of John for a reason, to legitimize those communities within the larger Christian community context.
Mm-hmm.
But out of all of those, in the narrative, Jesus skips over them all. And the
Mm-hmm.
very first person, it's like they're saying, okay, fine. You say Eve was deceived. Well, Jesus undoes all of that. The very
Yeah,
first human for Jesus to appear to, the very first human for Jesus to believe in the risen Jesus, to proclaim the risen Jesus, the very first human is now woman too. So whatever,
yeah.
with the myth that you want to exercise with Eve and all of that, and try to
Mm-hmm.
harness women with oppression and subjugation and within the patriarchal structure of the church, all of that is undone in the resurrection.
Yeah,
Jesus chooses woman to start the Christian church, to be the first to proclaim the risen Jesus. And I think it's such an in your face kind of, the narrative that the Johannine, and it makes sense because, again, the Johannine community was that proto Gnostic community, and we know that later Gnostic communities were more egalitarian. the
mm-hmm.
the the difference in the sexes was, to them, in the realm of the material, the
Right.
embodiment, our concrete world, and they were much more interested in liberating the spirit from the body. So the physical differences, and again, I know down today in our culture, there's a difference between sex and gender identity and gender expression. I get all of that. But for when this was written in their context, they were
Mm-hmm.
simply saying all that stuff doesn't matter. What matters is the spirit. And though I reject that premise that the body, saying the body in the physical, in our concrete world and all that is less important and devalued, I still appreciate what that led to. The fruit that it bore was that this egalitarianism between men and women
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
Johannine community, where the differences between male and female, those are in the physical world. There's a spirit in there that's equal, of equal value, and
Hmm.
it led to a practice of that was more that practice. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it led to a more egalitarian practice, definitely, than the patriarchal Christians practiced,
Right.
the
Right.
Orthodox Christians. I mean, the patriarchy won in the orthodoxy in the end. The orthodoxy was patriarchal.
Yeah.
The and this is the one area that I side with the Gnostics on. You know,
Hmm.
I have a problem with most of everything else in the Gnostic movement, early Christian Gnostic movement, but on the egalitarianism, I'm thankful for that, and we see it
Right.
shining through this week in Mary.
And so, wouldn't it be nice now at this point in our evolution as Christ followers, as people who believe in the Jesus story, um, to now to take the good from both, but to say, all right, now let's re-embrace this materialism. Let's embrace that the message of God, the message of Jesus is for the here and now and for the liberation of people here and now. And now, but then let's take the best from the proto-Gnostic approach and say, but take that back into the material world and say, all right, now what we understand about gender fluidity, orientation fluidity, and understanding the much broader diversity of God's creation, say that no, that materially reveals the glory of God. And if God
I love that.
and if Jesus was here today, it'd just be as likely that he would show up to a bisexual, or he would show up to a
Mm-hmm,
trans woman than
mm-hmm.
to Mary Magdalene herself. That for him, this the, all of creation are worth are called to share the story, are called to be part of the work of God, and all are worthy of being appeared to and ministered to by Jesus. And so to now take the rat to fully expand the ramifications of what we see John do with Mary. Um, we can do that in our culture today, and do that racially. We can do it culturally, and we can do it orientation and gender as well.
That's right. And I wrote in this week's blog, the Gospel of John calls us to listen to the voices of women whom the patriarchalists were attempting to marginalize in the early church. Today,
Mm.
we can step into that trajectory and not stop at just listening to women. We can listen to the voices of all those that society, or let's talk specifically the Christian faith, those in Christianity are still seeking to marginalize, whom I think
Mm.
you've so adequately and eloquently named. Yeah,
Yeah.
are they whoever it is that's being marginalized, whoever's being told to sit down and shut up, like
Right.
the women were being told, whoever that's happening to today, that's whom this story calls us to listen to and to honor. And instead of, as you said, instead of those differences in the material being, instead of those differences being a cause for us to estimate some as less than, we see it as the rich diversity and beauty that should be honored and celebrated and acknowledged and welcomed and included. And yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That would, if we
Well
could
said.
accomplish just that, Todd, this Easter, if we
Right.
could just have congregations that were listening to those who are usually pushed to the edges and undersides of Christianity,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
alone would be a resurrection, celebration.
Absolutely.
I would love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. For sure. What else do you have got for you? Let me try that again. What else do you have for us?
That's what I got this week. I love how the timing of Mary shows us what the intention of the story of Mary at the
Mm.
tomb was. It was kind of just that pushback. Whenever any
Mm.
type of hierarchy and exclusion and marginalization was being attempted in the early church, You see the Gospel of John stepping in and saying, "We need to listen to these
Yeah.
to the that's the voice. These are the voices that we need to be listening to."
And that's the beauty of really diving into getting to understand the background of these gospels. And as much as John, the Gospel of John, is frustrating to you and I in a lot of ways,
It has some
there's
gems.
there's some good reasons for what he's trying to do. And I mean, and when I say he, I mean those who crafted the gospel. Um, there's there's just uh, people
The
trying to
scriptures are
do.
complicated.
They are, they are,
They're
and
complex. You can't just write anything 100% off. There's always some hook or something. And that's what's so frustrating, is that there's always some hook or gem that keeps you from throwing out the whole thing. It's like, I can't throw out the book of John because, I mean, yeah, I got some problems with some of the chapters and what's written, as we've discussed. But then you
yeah,
hit stories like this and you're like, oh, that's good. That's
good
really good.
stuff.
And
Yeah,
I mean, the story of John 8 too, the woman caught in adultery. That's a great story.
that's a great
Even
story.
though it didn't belong to original John, the original
Right.
gospel, it's still a great, it's one of those that says, man, that'll preach. That'll preach. Got to hold on to that one. So yeah, this
Well,
story of Mary at the tomb.
and isn't that the truth about the whole story of Christianity and the story of Christ in our own lives? Is it's complex and messy too. Is
Yeah.
there's some gems in our story and there's some shit in our stories, and there's just we
Yeah.
there's stuff that we don't wouldn't want people to pick up on, and there's other stuff it's like, oh no, you got to grab hold of this. This is such gold, and this is so transformative for me. I want you to have it. So it's this the gospel accounts are humans doing their best to put it together, and doing it in very flawed ways, just like
That's
we
right.
try to do
John
that today.
John Bunyan used to say, who throws away the apple because it has a core? You just eat the
Mm,
apple and throw away the bad parts.
mm, well
But
said.
if we threw away an apple because it has some parts you can't eat,
Mm,
yeah, that's
well said
silly.
on. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, man. Well, it's good stuff. Thanks for the time, and to those of you who have joined us, we're always grateful that you take some of your valuable time and spend it with us, and hope that uh, you gleaned something from this that will help you in your life, in your teaching, in your ministry. And may you just know on this weekend that life is stronger than death, and that the resurrection does hold true for you and I. That life is stronger, and live into that
Mhm.
this weekend.
Yeah, we need to lean into those things that are life giving for sure. Happy Easter, everyone. Like Todd just said, thank you for watching. Um, you can find me at renewedheartministries.com.
And you can find me at toddjleonard.com or at my church website, glendalecitychurch.org. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you next week.
Happy Easter.